maybe I'll leave it permanently for this reading. So I'm reading today from The Psychoid Soul and Psyche, Piercing Space-Time Barriers by Belford Ulanov. And I'm reading this not because I'm a mental health professional, because I'm not, but because I find it very helpful to me personally, and you'll have to make your own judgment. So I'm reading a chapter from Dr. Ulanov's book, which is chapter 4, called Mending Trauma. Recognizing the level of psychoid experience as existing, coming to consciousness many ways, many different times, what effects does that have for our clinical work? It helps mend trauma. Now, I would refer you back to the video that is a companion to this video, which I made yesterday and which you'll find on the YouTube channel. I'm reading from page 42. Mending. Any of us touched by trauma, our own and those of our analysans, know the awful erasure of mind it leaves in its wake, like Andre Green's black hole of the missing mother that attracts all else into its no-thingness. For example, lacking a container smashed by trauma of dramatic loss, as in collective attack in Holocaust of a whole people, or succumbing to blank mind on a personal level because we never had a maternal container to lose, we get crazed symptoms. We compulsively lose containers necessary for living, dropping our passport in its holder on the airport floor, or leaving money in its wallet in the taxi, or our purse in the grocery cart as we drive away, having loaded the bags of food in our car. Or we drop out of the time-space where we are, staring off into nowhere, losing touch with the event or gathering of people of which we tried to be a part. Such repeated behavior happens outside our consciousness, unrepresented in thought or word, so we cannot gain the hidden meaning that dominates our actions with its repetitions. Jung's notion of the prospective function of the symbol, here reduced to the repetitive symptom, if patiently looked into, dragging into awareness how invalid such repetitions make us feel, may slowly move toward mending trauma. I do not say reversing trauma or getting rid of it, for its ruin dents us. Mending means finding ways to house it, no longer predetermined by its impact, but nonetheless bearing its weight. What we get instead is consciousness weighed down by hurt from injury, rage, and sorrow over what happened and goes on happening because we cannot bear it into knowledge and mourn it. What is denied yet present shows itself in imperative actions, hallucinations, strange objects, even delusions that appear to us and others as completely mad, but that also seek to break through into communication of what is buried alive in us. Such bizarre habits strip meaning from these potential bulletins. We need to find a link to their hidden news, helping us to recognize and represent what happened. The psychoid level of experience, if possible to bear, can weaken barriers against seeing into the symptoms of loss of soul and world at the center of trauma that felled us. The psychoid experience of the all in all, of time travel into past blows and present numbness, of the damaging other and the wrecked itself, of the ownmost self still able to be found and lived, of distinct parts all jumbled together now at once, can loosen rigid denials. The symptom may move slowly from entrapping us to disclosing its hidden meaning if we can respond to its message. Loss of valuable containers like a purse or a passport holder, or the gathering of friends now bespeak the container we never had to lose, or the one we had and lost forever by injury, by an other's madness. Those losses kept us stuck, like a person in a foreign country without papers to pass freely into the world of shared existence with others, or with a missing purse that had the names and numbers of an identity supporting us existing as particular subjects, or with absence that kidnaps us from community with others. We get close to the blankness, the black hole, the gap between functioning and not being fully alive, and slowly the trauma may begin to find mendings. We can then know it and feel its dreadful hold, but not be defined by it. It exists in us. Indeed, we carry it, but we no longer live hostage to its domination. We drag into consciousness trauma and its effects of loss of the good object inside, leaving the empty space of the dead mother and loss of capacity to create something with another, what Samuel Gerson calls the dead third. Kimmel, reviewing this idea, says it is an internalized world of inner deadness that guards against the unbearable. So I'm reading today from The Psychoid and the Soul, Piercing Space-Time Barriers by Dr. Anne Belford Ulanov. Flashbacks. And this one is important to me because of my personal experiences with PTSD. Flashbacks. One of the worst effects of trauma is flashbacks. There we are again back to square one, as if the trauma inflicts its blow for the first time. Utterly discouraged, we feel all our work on it has gotten us nowhere. We still live in devastation. We have learned nothing, grown nothing. And yet, clinical work has shown me another way to understand such flashbacks. We did go forward. Now we go backward. But in the psychoid field, those spatial boundaries recede, dissipate. We are curiously both forward and backward at once, a coinciding of opposite constructs with a piercing of their meanings with some greater meaning that emerges as questions. Where is this heading? To what purpose aims this simultaneity of opposite things thrown together? Here is a possibility. Because of the work we have done and the strength we have grown in relation to this trauma, we are taken back and down again to the nadir of injury, loss, rage, to scoop up the next layer of the affliction, to work now on this deeper level, to assimilate it and to differentiate it, and to differentiate from it. Our previous work on earlier levels of hurt increases our capacity to hear more acutely the communications. Start that sentence again. Our previous work on earlier levels of hurt increases our capacity to hear more acutely the communication attempted in the mandatory repetitive symptom. The primal trauma keeps replaying itself in one form or another. For example, if loss is trauma's central theme, it is a loss that needs to be finally and fully found and felt, and will not leave one alone until this occurs. But now, on the basis of work we have already done in relation to trauma, we experience at once, not in sequence, but in simultaneity in the present, a past happening and a future opening, a more profound level of suffering and greater space from it through working on it. At the same time, we are constructing images and meanings of causality because we are stronger emotionally and with greater understanding. We can tackle the next level of hurt, especially in a psychoid realm where all causal connections evanesce. We reconstitute spatial and temporal dimensions and categories of causality and self, while coinciding with the psychoid quality of surpassing all those familiar reference points, falling out of them, liberated from them. They do not hold, but yield a sense of being in a bigger bowl, of sustaining process, with meaning of something more impressing itself toward us, indeed beyond what we have known. We feel the whole jumble of hurt and healing, rage and understanding, devastation and commitment to work on our piece of the puzzle of human destructiveness and joy. We spot the whole venture and also the far side of its initiation from another source that feels near, eliciting our desire to contribute to this venture. How to relate to all this without going under the wave and out to sea. The ego is doing the relating. The archetypal dimension is the force of the wave. The out to sea is beyond archetypal structures. The reality girdling all, or the God beyond the archetypal God, if speaking in religious, spiritual terms. Trauma pushes us to do this work in order to survive. Do we want to say, good comes from evil, trauma has purpose of affecting this greater vision or our inhabiting of what it depicts? No, we do not want to say that. I'm going to read it again because I don't think I read it properly. Trauma pushes us to do this work in order to survive. Do we want to say, good comes from evil? Trauma has purpose of affecting this greater vision and our inhabiting of what it depicts. No, we do not want to say that. I do not. Pain hurts, and pain is not the exclusive route. We can reach to greater vision through the ecstatic that mixes opposites. Rilke saying, "For beauty's nothing, but beginning of terror we're still just able to bear." Or we go beyond through the sheer fun of meeting another fully, immediately, all 4 feet in and the others too. Or the wonderful gifts of nature, of friendship, of art, all bestow the mirth of being alive, the pleasure. But trauma happens and forces toward healing that stirs up this kind of rhythm of 2 steps forward, successfully assimilating and housing some of the trauma's damage, and 20 steps back into the core of its pain again. What I suggest here is the rhythm of healing the psychoid field confers that disrupts the old markers of progress. Instead, or also, we are conducted into the whole of it, a coincidence of trauma and healing that yield the possibility to be, to thrive. We learn some of our personal myth and see some of our patients' personal myth, and see some of the whole myth-making of meaning, that includes our personal response. Those of us particularly caught by religion, as was Jung, also pursue who is the author of all these multiple meanings. We are thus ushered into conversation with God, or what we name otherwise. The first witness. For such arduous, sustained work, we depend on an other as the first witness that something happened to us who wants to know what happened to us. This other listens intently as we try to speak of what is unspeakable, recognition of what took place and what effects go on occurring, like weeping, pacing, staring without words, defeats denial. We need that first witness who also looks with us to the forces in us and between us that seek liberation from entrapment. The analyst, for her part, if she is that other, must retain deep contact with her own inaugural image, her own root, her own thinking and feeling, not fleeing upwards into intellectualizations of what is happening in the psychoid field, nor in reactive defense against its dismantling of usual orienting markers. Living in the larger bowl, so to speak, the analyst arrives there from her own experience of destructiveness, creativeness, as a fellow citizen with her patient, a sister refugee from ordered, predictable world of personality number one, a sister refugee from ordered, predictable world of personality number one, as Jung names it in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and from the collective spirit of the times, as he names it in his Red Book. The analyst listens for the news conveyed in symptoms, bizarre images, and swirls of associations, accepting, as Jung's soul pronounces in the Red Book, that the mystery of life is that it has no laws. Experience precedes knowing. As an equal with her analysand, feeling the jumble in the psychoid layer, sensing breathing rhythms, body movements, intuiting seeds of potential meaning in the attack on meaning. They look for that bridge between the patient's dissociated states to hear the story not told, and which, as a rule, no one knows of, the patient's secret, the rock against which he is shattered. The priceless individuality of each person demands a unique response. The solution of the problem is always an individual one. The second witness. We also depend on the second witness of the psyche itself. What images is it offering to deal with what is happening to us, to our analysand? The unconscious mentality is an instinctive one. It does not think. It simply creates an image that answers to the conscious situation. This image contains as much thought as feeling and is anything rather than a product of rationalistic reflection. Psyche is always pushing at us through symptoms to get that shard of glass from trauma out of our system. Churning up new images in dreams, intruding fantasies, active imaginings to engage with what such images might express. The psyche itself badgers us with anxiety or harasses us with depression to jerk us awake, scare us into action. Our psyche gives us pictures in dreams, in repeating behaviors that portray what is going on, if we can understand it. For example, a young 80-year-old woman reduced to shuffling along in sneakers for the last 10 years due to unsatisfactory knee replacements, brings a first dream of going out, but having to go back because she forgot her golden high-heel shoes. What can the dream intend in picturing what is impossible to wear concretely, but calls up archetypal, Cinderella-like shoes, glamorous psychic footwear necessary before she can go further, even in this late decade in her life? Touching psychoid level of unconscious is synchronistic experiences. I'm sorry, I'm going to reread that. Touching psychoid level of unconscious in synchronistic experiences awakens us to a bigger dimension in which we are now living, a beyond already here that is near, and hits us with terrific impact of meaning. The release is not back to ego categories and predictable spirit of the times, but to the truth in the event that opens our hearts, makes us see the mess we got into from a different perspective. Maybe not ego defeat now, but a sign on the road that shows the next direction into this bigger world where everything is. How to house that? Not now, how to get back to adapt to collective expectations, but how to be remembered into this new possibility of finding our place in relation to the whatness to which we belong. Now I have to reread that sentence because it contains some parentheticals which I thought would be confusing if I read them the first time, but I'm going to read them now. How to house that? Not now how to get back to adapt to collective expectations, but how to made mindful again, remembered, aware again we are members, into this new possibility of finding our place in relation to the whatness, quiddity to which we belong. We see beyond our teller's window to the entire bank we work for, respond with soul's all-out willingness to serve that greater firm, and through it to honor its origin from the beyond which it conveys. New possibilities in such meaningful occurrences elicit new options and the verve to take them on. I'm going to read about the bank once again. We see beyond our teller's window to the entire bank we work for, respond with soul's all-out willingness to serve that greater firm, and through it to honor its origin from the beyond which it conveys. New possibilities in such meaningful occurrences elicit new options and the verve to take them on. The trustworthiness of the first witness who listens intently to us moves us to risk following a hunch that comes up between us and that other, to try a different response than blaming the other for our distress. In the psychoid field, analysand and analyst perform those prospective roles and live a more equal relationship of two together, facing elemental human experience that shows through the analysand's material. In example 1, which I read yesterday, it was called Murder. In example 1, I gave of psychoid event, my patient saw me both as analyst trained to do the job of analyzing and as a similar human finding her way with destructive and creative forces. Together we confront those forces in each other, in ourselves, between us, and engaging both of us together. We face a similar task: how to house such forces, use them, apologize for failures and mistakes, and feel pleased, even thrilled, when our efforts work. Options of response widen to laugh, or finally to utter a word breaking our long silence, to try and aligning with and using these destructive and creative forces. In addition, the way of proceeding is not linear in a psychoid field. A nudge, a scrap of memory, a child's immediacy of response, to wonder, to be open, joins our adult reflecting on a new possibility. Psychic energy begins slowly to move, or to stabilize from extremes into a steadier thrum. In example 1, I mentioned our confusion reigned. My patient said that the look on my face, showing I was in it too, made her know I was trustworthy. The work we were doing was trustworthy. She was trustworthy. We could count on it, and each other. I still have a little bit more to read, but what I want to point out a little bit here is that many of these same things happen in a normal conversation with a friend. And so it seems to me that if you're somewhat aware of some of these things that Dr. Belford Ulanov is talking about, then you can be more aware of them when you're having a conversation with your friend, which happens much more frequently, I presume. Meaning matters. Meaning matters. Recovering meaning makes living possible. But meaning often comes through the back door, not with flowers and a scroll declaring it elegantly, but in the examples I gave, with tears, silence, utter self-doubt. Its method of coming is also different from reasoning, logic, direct progression by steps. Meaning hints, pulses in our body, something clicks, chance associations throw opposites together, and reveals a larger unity between them without reducing either to the other, nor fusing or mixing them. Each opposing content remains diverse as my patient and I remain so in the midst of psychoid currents. Odd hunches gradually widen tiny spaces between self and the dominating complex. Who would have thought goodness appears in confusion, deficit, doubt? Who would have thought hunches could accumulate wisdom, that something more cannot be lassoed into conscious understanding? We know in a different way from usual reasoning, sensing, feeling, intuiting, registering in the body, in willingness of soul to respond. We answer with a whole heart to a whole world. This new experience changes our living. We respond with child's openness and adult's reflection to the impact of meaning. Jung sees such objective meaning as giving us absolute knowledge. We just know something, but do not know how we know it. Such meaning exists transcendentally, beyond consciousness and its categories and methods of understanding. Yet if we do not subjectively register the impact of this meaningful coincidence, it does not inscribe itself on us or our sense of something more, however we may define that. Our own sense of subjective I-ness is necessary to perceive what is objectively there. Our subjective response makes the objective fact of meaning accessible to us, and through us come into our culture, our family, our subjective agency, our sole willingness to respond is the path of objective meaning. In such experience, we both find meaning that shows itself and make meaning visible in our response to it. This contributes to healing, as I said above, of mending personal trauma and mending the splits in culture that deny meaning, that binds us into a people. The blanking of our mind in trauma that strips us of meaning occurs in totalitarian cultures where meaning is divested by the ruling body, be it a persecutory government or authorities in our training group, or the head of the school, the chief of police. Either they are coercive, or we project into them such bullying tactics. Totalitarian governments cover up such stripping, ransacking meaning by propaganda, putting a cover of lies over expunged truth. This makes citizens crazy. Meaning is looted from speech and action. Thoughts may not be thought, words may not be said, questions not asked, even dreams must be hidden. The astonishing implication is that our personal, subjective, even idiosyncratic responses to the larger dimension world that the psychoid level suggests and the synchronistic event discloses have to occur for the objective self-subsistent meaning to become real to us and thus enter our human culture. Objective meaning thus lies within, that is, depends on our subjectivity, and our subjectivity to feel really meaningful lies within, depends on, and our subjectivity to feel really meaningful lies within, depends on objective, independent meaning. Why are these implications important? Because they directly address our experience of meaning in life, that meaning exists and affects our meaning where we find where we belong and how to serve the whole. For example, Jung's notion of individuation, I understand, not that you and I achieve wholeness. I do not know any fully individuated people, and analysts are certainly not examples. Witness our food fights when we hurl back and forth psychological terms in combat with each other. Individuation means, I suggest, finding our place or path in the whole scheme. So we can say, and feel lucky to do so, as my late good friend did upon his retirement from a long teaching career. Looking back, I see I was where I belonged. He had found his path. That meaning sustained him through painful losses, affliction of illness. Jung says finding such meaningfulness to our own lives is what heals. What we do matters, indeed, has significance for life itself. I feel grateful for what you discover and put into the psychological atmosphere, the spiritual reality in which we all dwell, whether we know it or not. Of course, our process of meaning-making is in symbol formation. helps shape our objective meaning, shows itself. Helps shape how objective meaning shows itself. I'll just read that sentence again. Of course, our process of meaning-making, as in symbol formation, helps shape how objective meaning shows itself. The degree to which we gather personal associations of family, lovers, friends, mentors, flesh out our symbols, as do associations that spring from locations in neighborhoods, whether the smell of asphalt pavement on hot summer streets or cooling breezes wafted through a leafy glen, let alone the specific archetypal images that penetrate what meaning appears. In the moment of receiving the event's impact and making more of it in our response of fear and awe, we add to its meaningfulness. We need those first witnesses, whether analyst, spouse, author, and we need the second witness of images, sounds, even smells or textures that the psyche may offer. We want to know the true God from the true God, not a God we cobble together, nor a God so distant from our meaning-making there is no contact, no recognition. Jung was looking for what we are seeking, the interpenetration or bridge between everyday reality, or personality number one, and the ages of personality number two, that together make up one entire world of Earth and all its inhabitants, and cosmos, through history, humanity, and the heavens beyond. Jung suffered a division, but not a split, he said, between his two worlds. He sees their play and counterplay played out in every individual. Of himself, Jung says, "The difference between most people and myself is that for me, the dividing walls are transparent. I perceive the processes going on in the background, and this gives me an inner certainty, perceiving the stream of life." Jung coined words to describe this distinction: ego and self. Ego and self, spirit of times and spirit of the depths. I would add the self and the reality it mediates beyond self. For me, self is not God, but that in us that knows about God. Our subjective response is integral to meaning coming into view, and when it does, as something outside us addressing us, and inside us knowing about this something more outside us, we register its existence, not just our participation in it. I'll read that last sentence again. Our subjective response is integral to meaning coming into view, and when it does, as something outside us addressing us, and inside us knowing about this something more outside us, we register its existence, not just our participation in it. Sorry, I'm going to move my chat so I can see it. Hi, Julie. Yes, this circle is actually from a poster that I saw in the family court. Sorry. Obviously, sometimes I touch some of my own complexes quite deeply. But anyway, this short poem and image is something I saw on a poster in the family court in the hallway in Rochester, New York, about 40 years ago, and it has always stuck with me. So obviously it was quite numinous to me at that time. I didn't think about it for probably at least 10 years, but at the time I was separating from my first wife, it came into meaning for me, and I thought of it and remembered it, and the result is that I stayed close to my first wife and my children, and thanks to that, even though I didn't live with them after that, we separated in 1986. So though I didn't live with them after that, we stayed close. And so this Thanksgiving, all of us, my first wife, my second wife, and all my children and grandchildren, will be having Thanksgiving together. The last page of this paragraph is called Healing. How does experience of the psychoid level and the fact that meaning matters affect our clinical attempt to aid healing? What does healing look like? It appears as a greater capacity to think new thoughts, feel new feelings, admit various intuitions, engage imaginatively with more possibilities that heretofore never came on the scene, or if they started to, were dismissed by us. That is what healing looks like. Winnicott calls it more elbow room. Bion calls it developing alpha function to translate bombarding beta elements into actual thoughts and feelings, arriving at emotional truth of the moment. On a more personal level, I have heard analysans say, "It is a wish to love. I feel wonder. I feel increasing space. I feel increasing space between the tyranny of complex with its preemptive interpretations and the fact of myself." Sorry, I'm going to have to read that again. Just a moment. As I read these things, I open up my own traumas and my own complexes. I'll read the last sentence again. On a more personal level, I have heard analysans say, "It is a wish to love." It is a wish to love. I feel wonder. I feel increasing space between the tyranny of complex with its preemptive interpretations and the fact of myself. Clinical experience has shown me the condition of being depressed may slowly transform into a symptom. Depression still strikes, but the patient notices it and traces down the trigger that set such suffering in motion. Consciousness intercedes. Depression is no longer a condition that describes the total living space, but is an interrupter. The person has additional possibilities, feels plugged into sources of reasoning related to living energy that can be found. One feels not just the soothing, but the rectifying of dreaming, or, if not at night, when asleep, more aware of the currents of dreaming state, more aware of the currents of a dreaming state. They're also or aware of the currents of a dreaming state there also when awake. Imagination embroiders immediate experience, enriching its quality by funny or touching associations, or even associations of grieving that show the larger picture, rescuing us from gloom and from cheeriness. For the real thing, the sentiment Iris Murdoch expresses, goodness, it is good for nothing. It is. We are moving to gratitude for the generosity of reality. Okay, that completes the reading. I probably will have to reread about the last half of that reading because of the people that are trying to clean up our lawn outside our window. And Thomas says, the dog barking in the background is a pleasing touch. The dog may be pleasing, but I'm not sure the edge trimmer is. Julie says, going through a similar situation in my own family. God bless you and yours, Skip. You will help so many with your honesty. And she says, real healing is honesty for the wish to love. So true. Okay, and I mean, as I read this, it connected me back to many things that have happened. One that, you know, obviously for someone of my age, who's a man, the Vietnam War was a huge trauma, whether one served or one didn't serve. As it happened, I did serve, and when I was in the basic school, my roommate made a decision ahead of me which made him into an infantry officer and me into an artillery officer, which meant that I then went on to Chinese language training. And so while I was in Chinese language school, my roommate, Bob Christian, was killed on April the 11th, 1969. And obviously, that was a great loss to me, and quite a trauma. And it really made me responsible for living the life he might have lived also. And it often comes up for me in one way or another. The first time I went to the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, you know, I was a very rationalistic kind of guy in those days, long ago, when I was in the Marines, and I wasn't really convinced about the power of the Vietnam War Memorial, but three men I knew personally are on that wall, and when I went down into when I went down into the center of the memorial and started to come up on the side toward the Lincoln Memorial, I found Bob's name on the wall, and I burst into the kind of tears and trauma that you're seeing now. And another time, and so obviously I connected that incident with my experience with losing Bob. But one time in our reading group, when we were meeting every week at Sammy's Pizza restaurant, I started talking about an experience I had, which I had not been able to explain up in Boston, where I went into a exhibit of modern art at the Boston Museum of Art. And I've never been a big fan of modern art per se, and least of all in the work of Jackson Pollock, who was famous for his drip paintings, which contain no image whatsoever. But I'd never seen one in real life. And I walked into the gallery where the Pollock was on the wall, and the painting was mainly greens and browns and blacks and whites, and it had no image per se, but I immediately burst into tears, as you're seeing happening now. But I could never explain that. I could never connect it to anything. And I thought about that experience for 20 years. And then one evening, about a year and a half ago, we were at our Jung reading group, and one of my friends there, who is an artist, just said the words, olive drab. And there's a video of this, which you can find in the playlist called Breakthroughs to the Unconscious. It's one that's about 17 minutes long. And so you actually see my spontaneous reaction at that time. But when Bill said those two words, it suddenly connected up everything about the Vietnam War and what it meant to me, and the death of my friend Bob. And so I saw, and I think that was an example of the psychoid layer, where the boundaries of time and space fall away, and suddenly everything is just there. And so anyway, as I read this chapter of Dr. Ulanov's book, and today I've been reading from this book, The Psychoid Soul and Psyche, Piercing Space-Time Barriers. But as I read it before, I already understood what she was meaning by healing, and the fact that we don't cure a complex or a trauma like that, but we create more space so that we can live with it. And that was quite meaningful to me, and that's why I read it. And of course, when I read it out loud, it was even more meaningful to me. So I'll look at your comments now. So Julie had said, I'm not sure I read this, going through a similar situation, my own family, God bless you and yours again, you will help so many with your honesty. Real healing is honesty, for the wish to love is so true. And Thomas says, I know so many whose lives were irrevocably altered by that war, though their names are not on the wall. And certainly there are literally millions that's true, both those who served and those who didn't serve. As it happens, my longest and best friend in the world is a man who was also the son of a naval officer, but didn't serve, and he still lives in northern British Columbia on Vancouver Island. And but he's still my very close friend. And so Julie says, such a young man, you serve him well, Skip. My husband is 72. We have been together 30 years. Only after he took a stoke did I realize the emotional pain he has held all his life. Men carry on all our behalf. Thank you. Men carry a heavy burden on all of our behalf. Yes, I've learned there is no cure, just space to be honest and face it. And yeah. This is why when Dad came home from the war, he didn't talk about it much, because it's more than just it's more than wounds or anything like that. It's actually you know, when someone dies in your arms, which is one thing that did happen to me, a Marine, died in my arms one day. That's obviously a very great trauma too. Thomas says, I met with a group of mostly young women not long ago to listen to a talk on collective grief. It was not something I do often, but it was a place I could talk about my son's death in 2007. You know, obviously losing a child is a terrible trauma. I lost my brother in 1988, and it was a terrible trauma for not only for me, but for my parents as well. And so that grief carries with us. Julie says she meant stroke, so her husband had a stroke. And Thomas says, collective grief is a topic worthy of much more exploration, was my takeaway from the meeting. I certainly think that's true. I think the United States has a lot of collective grief for many reasons, and you know, some of them have to do with our war fighting, but some of them have to do with our politics, and some of them have to do with our history. And you know, as I was reading last night, so I urge everyone to go back and listen to the video that's side by side with this. But I was reading last night from a story of a man who had come to Dr. Ulanov and was talking about his family and the issues surrounding slavery. And it's quite something, because white people in the United States somehow thought that they had some sort of affection or loving relation with many of their slaves. And so I'll just read that passage again. This is on page 39 of this book. He says his wife was describing or I guess it was his aunt who was describing what it was like in the South. And he said, or she says, pressing further about how they farmed their land, he discovered from his aunt they had help. What kind of help? Well, African American helpers, then called Negroes, she said. Then he said to his aunt, you mean slaves? A long silence ensued, he said, holding him and his aunt. The word slave sunk in and in. With tears in her eyes, his aunt said, we didn't call them that then. His tears met hers, and I found myself moved by this recounting, drawn into the wound with which I believe we Americans as a nation still have not come to full terms. It still inflicts hurt of very deep shame and rage. So my patient, his aunt, and I traverse time and space, our separate lives, then, now, north, south, they two, we two, and all three of us drawn into that realm of wound, both physical and psychical, covered up and now exposed, of crushing people's freedoms to be subjects in their own right, with rights over their lives. My patient went on saying his aunt described how attached the family and the helpers were, especially this or that one in particular, who became friends and were educated with the family's children, with stories of mutual giving that supported the idea of shared affection. But then, she said, when emancipation came, the helpers left. They just left. They were discovered gone one morning. No goodbyes, no ceremonies of leave-taking. That goneness sobered the enchantment of affection, countered the notion of happy togetherness. The missing side of the relationship entered history, bringing disorientation, sorrow, and recognition into our consulting room. It was as if no years intervened, as if we now granted living space to people long dead, crowding in with his aunt all the helpers whose necessity for freestanding subjectness trumped affection. And so it's ironic that she ended that section with trumped affection. But anyway, it gives a sense of what the psychoid layer is that she was talking about. And it reminds me of one of our fellow active subscribers on this channel, Miles, who often talks about the healing that's going on in Canada over their native residents, and in the United States, it's obviously still a very big issue with respect to our Native American population, and it's an issue in this election. So this deep healing has to occur somehow. I don't know how. Julie says, last night's reading touched me deeply. Thank you. I'm glad it was worth it. And Thomas says, I feel a certain grief regarding America right at the present moment without going into much detail on the subject. Well, certainly. Julie says, agreed, Thomas. I think the USA was on its way to do that. It is now being hijacked by some very devious people. Well, I think that what we're seeing in the United States is the American shadow in its worst manifestation ever. But let's look at the bright side too. And the bright side is that we are at least airing these issues at some level. And that is literally the strength of the United States, because we disagree with one another. We shout and scream about it. And one time it led to war 150 years ago. But at least we do that. And in other countries, people are not allowed to voice their disagreements with one another. And so they have far deeper trauma than we experience in the United States. And, you know, who knows where it all leads? I don't know. But, you know, I think that there is one human spirit. I agree with Dr. Jung about that. And we all have to put our heads together and figure out where that spirit is taking us. And unfortunately, its way of learning is through conflict. Hopefully, it can be a way of learning through conflict in the sense of debate and election, fighting back and forth, and not in violence. Let's see. Sean says, I'm not sure if you have read Einstein's letter to his daughter, but that might send your spirit in the right direction. Okay, that's an interesting pointer. I never knew anything about that, so that's something to think about. And Julie says, did Jung not believe that only the individual could heal themselves, not as a collective? Well, he believed that that individuals have to heal themselves, and only then will the collective be healed. But you know, one of the things that we're doing on this channel is finding ways to collectively communicate ideas. So it's not necessarily something that is only an individual activity, and we all have to go into the corners of our rooms and work on ourselves, and then everything will be hunky-dory. I think it is something that we can do in part collectively, but in part individually. And so, I mean, as you've seen in this video that we're making right now, you literally saw some of my personal healing happening right in this video, and yet to have the witness of all of you, which is what Dr. Ulanov has been talking about in this particular chapter, has helped heal me, and maybe helped heal the country and helped heal other countries, in the sense that everyone that now watches this video will have these ideas to work with in their own minds. Let's see. Julie says, I'm a great admirer of the USA. I'm from Scotland. Many of my grandparents' generation migrated there. Yeah, we, Julie, we got all the ones that refused to sit still and stand still for it, and they left. And the same is true of my ancestors, many of whom in earlier generations came from Holland. And my ancestors simply got tired of the 80 Years' War, which was a war in which the Spanish Catholics used to come up to Holland every summer to beat up the Dutch and make us give up our Reformed Protestant church. And the Dutch were as hard-headed as the Scots, and ultimately they decided that the Spanish were strong, and so they said, we just want to farm, let's go to the New World. And so they did. And but then they found that you can't run away from it, that in the end you have to face it and figure out how to solve the problems. Let's see. Thomas says, are we not our brother's keepers? In answer to the collective question, which doesn't mean we coerce our human brothers, sisters, but that we care about them and try to help lead them to wholeness. There are drug courts that help in that effort here, sending offenders to treatment rather than immediately to jail. And yes, I think that's and that's partially the point of this symbol that I have over my right shoulder, in that human beings somehow got the idea over the last 2,000 years that you had to clash if your ideas differed from other people. And that works up to a point, but the reality is that pale blue dot out there in the universe is the only thing that supports all of us. And so in the end, we have to learn how to live together and better. And prohibition has never been a very good way to solve problems. We see it in the drug debate, we see it in the abortion debate, and so on, that some people want to prohibit and rather than to solve the problems. And of course, if we prohibit abortion once again, we won't save any babies. We'll just brutalize our society once again. And the people who will be dying will be women more than they do now. And so, and the drug issue is one that has affected me directly because my brother-in-law's son died of drug overdose about 18 months ago, and a close friend's son died in May of this year. And so it's touched me twice in the last 2 years. And it seems to me that we need to look at treatment rather than incarceration, and obviously education too. And so there are lots of issues there. Thomas says, what was in response to the question about the individual healing themselves versus collective healing? Well, obviously we have to heal ourselves and we have to have collective healing. There are two levels, and one of the things that has troubled me a bit about Jungian psychology is that it went and focused only on the individual and left aside what Dr. Jung talked about society. And at least half of his oeuvre is about society and not about the individual per se as well. Sorry, this is the time every week when they cut the grass outside my place. But my point is that the Jungian analyst community does focus almost exclusively on individual work, which is fine for their profession, but it doesn't help our society very much. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do, is to get people to think about the fact that we also have to heal our societies. Furai says, one must read Krishnamurti to know thyself. Well, I think Krishnamurti had a lot of good things about him. He was an amazing man. And one of the things that the people who found Krishnamurti, who were theosophists, wanted was for him to become a new Messiah. And he played along with them up until his 33rd birthday, I think. And it happened to also be the 20th anniversary, I think, or maybe the 30th anniversary of the Theosophist Society in Netherlands. But on that day, Krishnamurti got up and gave a speech in which he said that I'm nobody's Messiah, and I'm not going to be your Messiah. And so the result of that was that he had followers as if he was a Messiah for the rest of his life. He could not escape it, but he had a lot of very good wisdom in him. Yes, Julie says, did you know that Krishnamurti denounced much of the work he had done, believing it to be harmful? That I didn't know beyond the renunciation of the Theosophists and what they were trying to do with him. But obviously there are lots of people who read and find solace in Krishnamurti's work, and I think that it's all of us need to find our solace and the solace for our society in many different people. I don't think that it's in one person, and certainly Krishnamurti must have thought in that way. He didn't want to be a Messiah. Anyway, Julie says, as in enlightenment without individual, i.e. not destroying. Thomas says his favorite quote from Krishnamurti is, "Truth is a pathless land." It's good. I hadn't heard that one, but that's a good one. Sean says, can you talk about Christ's relationship to the rebirth of healing through sacrifice, or maybe some insight? Well, I'm not sure that Christ per se said such a thing. And what Dr. Jung tried to do is to link up Christ's life and the implications of Christ's life with the rest of us, recognizing that we all suffer in one way or another. We all, obviously we all lose our parents, we all face death ourselves, and there is always suffering, and all religions have faced suffering. And so all religions relate to it. I think that Dr. Jung's fundamental point about Christ's life is that he understood a meaning of his life, and he lived it perfectly. And to include on the cross when he said, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Because that was the human part of the God-man, the Son of God, coming through. And other than that, he lived his life perfectly as the Son of God, because that's the way, the meaning that he saw in his life. And so his sacrifice was to try to create change and to try to convey his message more, I think. Miles says, many so-called Christians believe they are to seek and save others. This leads to abuse and the loss of great wisdom of the diverse peoples around the world. Absolutely. And Thomas says, I found his books at a terribly early age, well, first in college in 1972. Yeah, I think wisdom might be wasted on the young. I'm not sure. Julie says, I am not. Jung made it clear that without the ego, a person would be crushed by the work, a soulless vessel for an other spirit. Thomas says, I think the spirit of noise is seeking to disrupt my talk. Absolutely. And Julie says, we must all go on our cross, the cross we spend our lives carving. Absolutely. Okay, so I think that we can terminate this and continue the discussion at our regular group meeting on Monday night. And thank you, Julie, for participating from Scotland. I'm sorry that our group meetings are so late for you, but if I'm trying to do these sessions sometimes during the afternoon or late morning to give European followers an opportunity to also participate. And I sometimes think about scheduling them, but I've already scheduled the advanced reading group every Wednesday at 1:30. And so I'm finding preparing for the two-hour sessions to be quite challenging. And so the reading sessions that I'm doing on a ad hoc basis are more what moves me to talk about with my fellow human beings. And my wife is out at work, so I don't have anybody stopping me or calling me to dinner at the moment. So anyway, peace, everyone. I'm going to terminate the session. Sorry. It's been nice talking to you today.